America's tallest dam was failing, and for 5 terrifying days in February 2017, the country watched as a disaster of unimaginable scale threatened to unfold in Northern California. This is not a story about a distant problem in a forgotten corner of the country. This is the story of the Oroville Dam, the keystone of California's water system, a 770-foot-tall monument to engineering ambition, holding back a lake so vast it serves 27 million people. But this monument was cracking. It was tearing itself apart, and 188,000 people were told to run for their lives because a 30-foot wall of water was minutes away from erasing entire towns from the map. What you're about to hear is not just the story of a broken dam, it is the story of a hidden weakness, a flaw buried for 50 years, a secret kept by aging concrete and ignored by generations of engineers. Before we go any further, think about this. What's the one piece of modern infrastructure you trust completely without ever seeing how it truly works? A bridge, a tunnel, a dam? Let us know in the comments below. The water was not just threatening to spill. It was using the dam's own systems against itself, turning a tool of safety into a weapon of mass destruction. We're a small team and have one of the lowest subscription rates on the platform. And while a massive number of people watch and love these deep dives, most forget to subscribe. It's the single most critical thing you can do to ensure we can keep making them. So, if this is the kind of story you value, please take 1 second to hit that subscribe button. It's an emergency for us. Now, let's begin. This story starts not with a crack, but with rain, an impossible amount of rain. The winter of 2016 and 2017 ended a 5-year drought with a vengeance. A series of storms known as atmospheric rivers slammed into the Sierra Nevada mountains, dumping biblical amounts of water. But it was worse than just rain. The warm storms melted an unusually deep pre-existing snowpack. It was a rain-on-snow event, a nightmare scenario for water managers. Runoff into Lake Oroville increased by 37%. The lake rose faster than anyone expected. It rose with a fury. By February 7, 2017, the California Department of Water Resources, the DWR, had no choice. The lake was getting too full. They had to open the main spillway. The service spillway at Oroville is a concrete river of its own. A 3,000-foot-long chute, 179 feet wide, designed to safely carry floodwater from the lake down into the Feather River 500 feet below. It is the dam's primary release valve, a tool of controlled power. On that Tuesday, operators opened the gates, releasing water at a rate of 52,500 cubic feet per second. This was not a record, not even close. Just 10 years earlier, the same spillway had safely handled over 160,000 cubic feet per second without any issue. This should have been routine, business as usual. But it wasn't. A little after noon, a DWR worker walking near the spillway noticed something strange. The water flowing down the concrete chute wasn't smooth. It was turbulent, choppy. It looked wrong. He drove down to get a closer look and saw it. A gaping hole had opened up in the spillway floor. A massive crater. Concrete, rebar, and earth had been blown out, leaving a jagged wound in the chute. The water, a relentless, destructive force, was pouring into the hole and ripping it wider with every passing second. The operators in the control room were faced with a decision from a nightmare. They had to inspect the damage, but they couldn't do that with a river flowing over it. So they made the call. They shut off the flow. They closed the gates. Silence fell over the spillway, and in that silence, the lake continued to rise. This is where the crisis begins its terrifying cascade. The damaged main spillway was now unusable. Every drop of water that flowed into Lake Oroville from the melting snowpack and the relentless rain was now trapped. For 4 days, the water level climbed higher and higher, creeping relentlessly toward the top of the dam. It was inching towards a line that had never been crossed in the dam's 50-year history. The emergency spillway. And here's the part that makes this so deeply disturbing. The term emergency spillway suggests a hardened, engineered, concrete structure, a backup system just as robust as the main one. But that is not what it was, not even close. The emergency spillway at Oroville was simply a 50-foot tall concrete lip, called an OG weir, sitting at the edge of the reservoir. Below that concrete lip, nothing. Just a raw, unpaved, earthen hillside covered in trees and dirt. It had never been used. It had never been tested. It was a spillway in name only. We're now 3 minutes in, and the worst part hasn't even happened. Does hearing about a failure this massive in a piece of critical infrastructure make you question the safety of the systems in your own state or city? I'm genuinely curious to read your thoughts. Drop a comment below. On Saturday, February 11th, the inevitable happened. At 8 a.m., the water of Lake Oroville kissed the top of the concrete weir. Then it began to spill over, for the first time ever. A curtain of water, a few inches deep at first, poured over the edge and onto the dirt hillside below. To the untrained eye, it looked almost graceful. The system was working. The pressure was being relieved. But to engineers and geologists watching, it was the beginning of the horrifying process. Headward erosion. Water flowing over raw earth doesn't just flow. It cuts. It tears. It scours away the soil, creating a gully. And that gully doesn't just get deeper, it eats its way backwards, upstream, toward the source of the water. With every passing hour, the stream of water flowing over the emergency spillway grew from a trickle into a torrent, and the gully it was carving into the hillside became a canyon. It was chewing through the earth, getting deeper and wider, and it was racing backwards, directly toward the base of that concrete weir. The nightmare scenario was sickeningly simple. If the erosion reached the base of the concrete weir, it would undermine its foundation. The 50-foot tall wall of concrete would lose its support. It would collapse. And the collapse would not release a small amount of water. It would release the top 30 feet of Lake Oroville. A sudden, uncontrolled, unstoppable wall of water would pour out of the reservoir and surge down the Feather River Canyon. It would be a tsunami, a wave that would overwhelm everything for miles downstream, wiping out the towns of Oroville, Yuba City, Marysville, and others. It was a disaster that would kill thousands, and the hillside was eroding fast. By midday on Sunday, February 12th, the situation was critical. The erosion was accelerating, moving at a terrifying pace. Butte County Sheriff Kory Honea was in the command center, listening to the engineers. They were telling him the weir could fail within the hour. He was responsible for the lives of everyone downstream. He had to make a call. There was no time for a phased evacuation. No time for a warning. It had to be immediate. It had to be now. At 4:50 p.m., the alert went out to nearly 188,000 people. This is not a drill. Evacuate immediately. Panic hit the streets. Highways became parking lots. Gas stations were overwhelmed. People grabbed what they could and fled, staring up at the dam, wondering if they would have a home to come back to. Sheriff Honea, in a moment of raw honesty, described the scene to the press. It was just an ugly, shitty mess, and we are trying to make the best of it. He was facing a choice between a chaotic, terrifying evacuation and a certain mass casualty event. He chose chaos. He chose life. This story is a stark reminder of the fragile trust we place in the world built around us. If you feel this is a story that needs to be heard, please take a second to hit the like button and share it. Send it to your family, to your friends, anyone who believes that our modern world is built to last forever. Your share helps this story reach more people who need to understand these risks. Back at the dam, The engineers were now in a desperate race against physics. The only way to stop the emergency spillway from collapsing was to stop sending water over it. And the only way to do that was to lower the lake level. Fast. But how? The main spillway was broken. The emergency spillway was actively trying to kill 188,000 people. They were out of good options. They were left with only the lesser of two evils. The acting director of the DWR, a man named William Bill Croyle, made the agonizing decision. On February 13th, he gave the order to reopen the main spillway, not at the gentle 52,500 cubic feet per second that broke it in the first place, but at 100,000 cubic feet per second, double the flow. They decided to deliberately, consciously sacrifice their own billion-dollar asset. They were going to use the power of the water to tear their own spillway to shreds. They pointed a fire hose at their own house to stop the whole neighborhood from burning down. The effect was immediate and violent. A torrent of water, equivalent to a major river, slammed into the damaged chute. It ripped away what was left of the concrete slabs. It scoured the bedrock 100 feet below. It threw boulders the size of cars into the air. It was a controlled demolition on a staggering scale. The spillway was destroying itself, exactly as they intended. And as it died, it saved them. The flow of 100,000 cubic feet per second was more than what was coming into the lake. The reservoir level began to drop. Slowly at first, then faster. It pulled back from the emergency spillway weir. The flow of water over the dirt hillside slowed, then stopped. The erosion halted. The immediate crisis was over. The 30-foot wall of water would not be coming. On February 14th, the evacuation order was reduced to a warning. People began to return to their homes, shaken and uncertain. But the image of that shattered spillway was burned into the national consciousness. America's tallest dam had nearly failed, and nobody could understand why. How could a structure this massive, this important, be so fragile? The answer would come nearly a year later, in a damning 584-page report from a team of independent investigators. And the truth it revealed was far more terrifying than a simple crack in the concrete. The failure at Oroville was not an accident. It was an inevitability written into the dam's DNA from the moment it was designed. And here we are, at another reminder. I know. You're thinking, he's not going to ask me to subscribe again, is he? Yes, I am. It's funny how you can get so wrapped up in a story about a potential apocalypse that you forget the small things. But for us, that small thing is everything. Our channel lives or dies on your support. Please, be one of the few who remembers. Click subscribe. Okay, I'm done. For now. The investigation, led by a geotechnical engineer named John France, brought together a 6-member independent forensic team, or IFT. Their job was to go beyond the obvious damage and find the root cause. What they discovered was a quiet killer, a phenomenon that had been working to undermine the spillway for 50 years, unseen and undetected. The process was called hydraulic jacking. It sounds complicated, but the concept is terrifyingly simple. Water is heavy, but water under pressure is a weapon. The spillway chute was made of massive concrete slabs. Over decades, tiny cracks and poorly sealed joints had formed between these slabs. When water rushed down the spillway, some of it was forced into these cracks at immense pressure. It got underneath the concrete slabs. Water that is trapped has nowhere to go, and it exerts force in all directions. It was pushing up. It was lifting the concrete. The water was acting like a hydraulic jack, a crowbar, prying the massive multi-ton slabs right off their anchors. The report stated it clearly. Water injection through both cracks and joints in the chute slab resulted in uplift forces beneath the slab that exceeded the uplift capacity and structural strength of the slab. Once a slab was lifted, even by a fraction of an inch, the full force of the water rushed underneath, exposing the poor quality bedrock to an erosive force it was never meant to withstand. The spillway didn't fail because the water was too powerful on top. It failed because the water was attacking it from below. It was an invisible assassin. But why was it so vulnerable? The IFT report dug deeper into the original design, back to the 1960s. And what they found was shocking. The design of the spillway's drainage system was fundamentally flawed. To prevent water from building up under the slabs, builders are supposed to install underdrains, pipes that collect seepage and carry it away. Normally, these drains are recessed into the bedrock beneath the concrete. But at Oroville, for reasons that remain baffling, the builders installed the clay drain pipes so they protruded into the concrete slabs themselves. Picture it. They intentionally created a weakness. It was like building a perforated tear here line across a piece of paper. This deeply flawed design created dangerously thin sections of concrete, right where the slabs needed the most weight and structural integrity to hold themselves down against the incredible force of the water. The very system meant to protect the spillway from uplift pressure was actually making it weaker. It gets worse. These problems were not a secret. The IFT report detailed something called the normalization of deviance. Almost immediately after the dam was completed in 1968, the spillway began showing signs of stress. The concrete chute cracked. The drains leaked. Repair crews were sent out, year after year, to patch the cracks and fix the drains. They documented these issues in maintenance logs, but over 5 decades, these severe structural anomalies came to be seen as normal. They were just part of the dam's personality. They were routine maintenance issues, not existential threats. No one stepped back and asked the terrifying question, why does a structure this important keep breaking in the same way, over and over again? They were so used to the warning signs that they had stopped seeing them as warnings. They were just noise. They slapped a Band-Aid on a mortal wound, year after year, until the patient finally bled out. The spillway's failure in 2017 wasn't a sudden heart attack. It was the final stage of a chronic disease that had been left untreated for half a century, and the fact that it failed under a relatively low flow of 52,500 CFS, when it had previously survived 160,000 CFS, was the ultimate proof. It wasn't the strength of the flood that broke it. It was the depth of the rot. The structure was progressively weakening, getting more fragile with each passing year, until one final push sent it over the edge. And then there is the most disturbing rumor of all. A lesser-known fact that adds a layer of human tragedy to the engineering failure. According to some reports, the principal designer for the original 1960s spillways was allegedly a postgraduate student with no prior professional experience designing spillways. A critical piece of infrastructure, the safety valve for America's tallest dam, may have been an academic exercise, a student's project. The final report from the IFT concluded there was no single cause. It was a perfect storm of failure, summarizing it as a complex interaction of relatively common physical, human, organizational, and industry factors. Flawed design, poor construction, and a culture of complacency had conspired over decades to create a time bomb, ticking away at the heart of California's water infrastructure. And in February 2017, that bomb finally went off. The immediate aftermath was a monumental effort. The debris from the destroyed spillway had backed up the Feather River, creating a new emergency. Over 1.9 million cubic yards of concrete and earth had piled up, clogging the river channel and threatening to flood the Edward Hyatt power plant, a massive underground hydroelectric facility located at the base of the dam. For 9 straight days, crews worked around the clock dredging the river to save the power plant from being inundated. Then came the bill. The initial estimate for the repairs was around $200 million. A staggering number. But as the full scope of the damage and the necessary redesign became clear, that number exploded. By September 2018, the official cost for the emergency response and the complete reconstruction of the spillways had ballooned to an almost unbelievable $1.1 billion. A private construction firm, Kiewit Infrastructure West, was awarded the contract to not just repair, but completely rebuild the spillways from the ground up to a modern standard that could withstand the forces that destroyed the original. Crews worked at a relentless pace. They had to meet a critical public safety deadline, finish the primary concrete placement on the new main spillway by November 1st, 2018, before the next winter rainy season could arrive. They met it. The new spillway was a beast. Thicker concrete, robust steel reinforcement, and a drainage system correctly installed in the bedrock below. It was the spillway Oroville should have had all along. Years passed. The scars on the landscape healed. In May of 2026, after another wet winter, Lake Oroville once again neared capacity. The DWR reported the lake at 99% full, holding nearly 3.25 million acre-feet of water. They began making flood control releases down the newly built spillways. It was the first real-world, high-stakes test of the $1.1 billion reconstruction. The new chutes performed flawlessly. The concrete held. The drains worked. The water flowed down into the Feather River, powerful but controlled. It seemed like the story had come to a close. A disaster averted, lessons learned, a stronger system built in its place. But that is not how these stories end, because the threats to our most critical systems are never static. They evolve. And just as California was celebrating its victory over an engineering failure, a new kind of threat was quietly being allowed to seed itself in the waters of Lake Oroville. A biological threat. In a move that stunned environmental experts, California water managers decided in June 2026 to end the boat inspection programs designed to keep a destructive invasive species known as the golden mussel out of Lake Oroville. Anthony Riccardi, an expert on invasive species from McGill University, warned that abandoning these precautions was turning the lake into a potential hub for an epidemic. Unlike the dramatic, violent failure of concrete, the threat of the golden mussel is silent and insidious. These tiny creatures multiply with terrifying speed. They form dense colonies that can encrust and completely choke vital dam infrastructure. They can clog power plant intakes. They can block pipes. They can destroy the very systems the dam needs to operate safely. The $1.1 billion spillway rebuild fixed the engineering flaw, but it is powerless against a biological invasion. So the question that hangs over Oroville today is darker than before. We spent $1 billion to fix a problem we could see, a problem of concrete and steel. But are we now ignoring an invisible threat that could cripple the entire system from the inside out? Are we once again normalizing a new kind of deviance, cutting corners on prevention and hoping for the best? The Oroville crisis was a warning about hidden weaknesses, about the danger of ignoring small problems until they become catastrophic ones. It was a lesson paid for with $1 billion and the terror of 188,000 evacuated citizens. The reconstructed spillway stands as a testament to that lesson. But as the silent threat of the golden mussel grows, you have to wonder, did we really learn anything at all? Or are we just waiting for the next crisis, the next failure, the next ugly, shitty mess?